Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Art Basel Conversations. It's a pleasure to introduce you to our next panelists who are going to speak on the impact of data on the market. It's moderated by Josh Baer, advisor and publisher of Faxt, and he's going to be in conversation with Dr. Clare McAndrew, founder of Art Economics. Josh, please, for you.
Thank you so very much. Good job there. Welcome, everybody. I'm an art advisor and an art market person, and I'm often thinking myself as like maybe one of the world's experts on the art market, but in fact, the world expert on the art market, I have to say, is sitting next to me, Clare, she's got the degrees, the PhD, the teaching, writes the best reports about the sort of the 35,000-foot view of the art world and the art market. So I'm thrilled to have someone here who really makes a career out of thinking about these issues. I'm afraid that I freaked her out a little bit when I brought up the topic because I sort of said, maybe we should call it, what if Larry Gagosian hired Cambridge Analytics? That's the firm that did the Trump, and she freaked out, and it was a joke. But with that in mind, we sort of scaled down to talk about data. And before we get started, I'd like just a sense of who's in the room. If you're an artist, could you raise your hand? Okay, in the back, the people who work here. If you're an art collector? Okay, an arts professional in the gallery world? Okay, I've got a few journalists. Okay, so we have a wide range of people with different interests, but we'll try to gear our answers to what might fit. So I'm going to start off by asking Clare, who can say her own intro if she wants. It's kind of an obvious question in this topic, but I'm not sure that it doesn't hurt to always define the topic a little more specifically. So we all hear the word data, and we take it for granted what it means, but what is data, or what does data mean? And big data, little data, is it all data?
Thanks, Josh. I guess it's, data is just the facts and the statistics we use to analyze stuff, but it's probably how it's classified that's the most useful to describe it with. And it's actually a little bit like you and me. I was just thinking there's structured and unstructured. So the first one is structured data, which is my kind of realm and where I came from. And that's stuff that has a defined kind of schema, and you can put it into a database or a spreadsheet, basically. It can be quantitative in numerical form or qualitative describing something, but you can basically, it's neat and it's linear, and you can put it in a spreadsheet. And then there's unstructured stuff. This is the stuff that's not organized, or defined. It's all the social media posts, blogs, images, this stuff that's coming in huge volumes from people and all the devices that they're on. And I suppose until recently, unless it was neat and ordered and linear, we didn't use it at all. We just used the stuff that we could use in spreadsheets. And if it didn't fit into that kind of model, we chucked it out and we didn't use it. But now we're trying to capture and store and use and process all of this data. But because it's so big and because it's so unstructured, we need new tools and analytics and innovative technologies to be able to process it. And if you think, like when Google started, I think it was late 1990s, there was about 10,000 searches per day. And I remember using Google in the late 90s in academia, and there was mainly kind of academics using it to start with, but there was only about that quantity of searches a day. Now there's 5.5 billion searches a day on Google. So it's really, the amount of data that's being generated is huge. And the idea, I suppose, with big data is to use this very big volume of data. What defines it as big, I suppose, is the volume. There's so much of it. It comes from a variety of different sources. It's coming at you really fast. It's all from kind of trusted and untrusted sources. But it's, instead of just using that small, maybe 20% of structured data to analyze things, it's using the other 80%. And a lot of the basis of using analytics for big data analytics is kind of building models, running simulations over and over again, tweaking the data and inferring what you can from the results. And most of the time is to try and either predict something, which is always based on the past, or to have some kind of prescriptive conclusions where you're saying, what's the best course of action if I do this, this, and this?
Look, just at the beginning, before we get into it a little deeper, so structured data is like year, price, size, for an artwork? I mean, art isn't data itself. So
well, it's all the aspects of it. I mean, even with images or descriptions, you can tag them and you can put them into spreadsheets. So it's things that even that you can tag, you can still kind of put them into spreadsheets. And we've had those from the beginning. I mean, when I started researching, there was the art price databases that were around since the early 80s. There was Art Price, ArtNet, Art Fact, which is different from Art Facts that's now, but Art Fact, they were the three big databases. There was, the Art Loss Register was around from the 90s. There was all these, I remember when I was doing my kind of university studies, there was Art Sales Index on a CD, and I remember trying to scrape it all. I had to put a stone on the mouse of my computer and walk away for nearly a day to kind of scrape it all. But it was all there, so these aspects have been collected. But it's all of the databases, the structured databases that exist are based on stuff in the public domain. And this was before the introduction of big companies like Artsy and things that are collecting a whole lot of different types of data, the unstructured data. And I guess the big thing in the art market has always been public versus private. So the databases, the art price databases, are just basically regurging what's already in the public domain in auctions or exhibitions or whatever it might be. Whereas there's a whole lot of other private data, and there's ways that we attack that as well.
Well, since you mentioned it, how do you separate data from fake data? I don't know if that's a term, but, correct data from guessing of what's there. What's going on in the auction world is separate from what's going on in the gallery world. You're trying to combine structured data to each. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, the private data stuff, I mean, the structured data, there is a lot of data that the veracity of it is very kind of questionable whether you can use it or not. I'm a firm believer in that just because there's a lot more of things doesn't mean it's necessarily better. There's a lot more data, but it's not all good quality data. But in terms of the private data, I mean, you can only attack it a certain amount of ways. It's either surveys, which are used in every single industry with great kind of joy, but when they're applied to the art market, there seems to be a lot of mistrust of them for some reason. I'm not really sure why. There's also things like crowdsourcing, getting data from the public in, which is only useful in a certain way. And then there's setting up kind of other ways of accessing user submissions. And then there's online behavior again, and this is where companies like Artsy are gathering huge swathes of private data on how people behave online as well. So you can only really attack the private sector by user submission, really. So
the data points are now evolving, that we used to have just a few. Now we're measuring more, both structured data. Are we asking anything new about that, or all the real move is unstructured data have certain kind of data points?
Well, it's both. I mean, we're getting better at structured data. We're getting much better at that and asking the right things. And
such as? How so?
I suppose just finding better ways to tag and to collect data from a wider range of auction houses and vetting things more, doing better survey research, doing things like my colleague Anders at Art Tactic does sentiment testing where he looks at, sets up panels of data. So there's lots of things, and this is all in the very structured area still. We're not using, it's still in that 20% of data.
Who is this information for?
I suppose it's for anybody that wants to use it. I mean, the reason that the report I started doing, the global report, was primarily originally for the art trade itself, because they were looking for funding or to change regulations or to lobby government for a tax break or to do whatever they were going to do. And when you approach a government and say, we'd like more lenient regulations about export and imports, or you'd like anything like that, the first thing they ask is, well, kind of how big is the market, how many people are involved, all those kind of things. So that was the macros kind of stuff that I do. And then the more kind of finite kind of indices, which I have split opinions on, are for collectors, for again, people interested in specific artists. They're really for a wide range of people.
If you were a gallery, do you think that they have enough data to try to build some questions and model? Is there something they should be doing to collect data, analyze it, or is it something they should just be reading your report and saying, what she says is generally true, and it doesn't relate to me.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of, I found this, especially working with the people from Talking Galleries as well, there's a lot of galleries concentrate really on what's happening now, and they have to because their resources are limited, but they could do a lot more planning, and some of it, I mean, I've come the full circle on the value of kind of quants and stuff. When I started out, I thought everything could be fit into a kind of a quantitative model, and you didn't really need anything like that. I've come the full circle with my experience of the last kind of 15 years or so working in the art market. I think it has a place, but it only guides you on big picture stuff. It only guides you where things are going, maybe in a sector or something like that. Obviously, the kind of research that galleries need to do is a lot more, micro level. But they can be collecting lots of information about their artists, about their kind of preferences of the people that they're working with. But they tend to be, there's very few galleries that are thinking of where they're going to be in 5 or 10 years' time. A lot of them are concentrating on where they are now. So I think using data to help plan for the future is in the galleries.
I think some of the big galleries have secretly or not so secretly hired management consultants to come in, McKinsey's to look at what they do. And I know that there's some pretty famous art advisory firms that are looking to hire out to galleries to sort of study their industry. Do you think this is a trend that data could help someone come in and say, you've always done it like this, but how good are those results? Can you actually predict results based on doing something or not? Do you think that that's something that one could do either for a collector or for a gallery? Again, use data to predict or change the future.
I think you can for sure, but I think there's a problem in, and it kind of stems back to this big data thing, and I think a lot of the problems in research and using data generally is that the models that people use are often kind of underdetermined, so you can get really conflicting evidence. If you base your strategy purely on data, you can prove several different things with exactly the same data. And it kind of goes back to what people focus on when they're maybe using data to make a plan is how a hypothesis that they have is proven with certain data. So they might say there's more people, young people in the art market, online sales are going up, so there must be more young people buying art. Instead of kind of considering other aspects of the model, for example, it's a little bit like kind of Bayes' theorem, this kind of 18th century maths guy. He said it's not just the hypothesis proving the evidence, it's also how likely was the hypothesis in the first place, was the evidence going to be there whether the hypothesis was there or not? Were online sales going to go up whether there was young people in the market or not? There's all these things, it's the explanatory power of the data you're using. So it's not just it's very tempting just to kind of leap on things that are kind of correlated or to kind of, to set yourself forward on a kind of a prescriptive path. But
yes, it's hard to say, well, for instance, how many people know that Gagosian Gallery opened an online gallery, I think, this week? Anybody look at it? That's kind of interesting. They put works and prices and whether it was sold or not. It's like, for me, that's a correlated kind of data, but that's an interesting...
They've only got 10 works of art.
They were only... Well, it's just...
And a small data set.
Small data set.
Yeah, but it's
I think I saw one that was sold. And who knows if it's all BS to make you believe, and we know not to trust anything or everything, but I think people are looking at that, whether it's Brett Gorvey putting something on Instagram and selling it. I think people are starting to anecdotally think more and more in this area. Certainly the reason I thought of this title of this is certainly driven by the political situation in America for how elections may or not been, that big data was wrong and all the models were wrong and we all got screwed. So how does that relate to the art market? Are people thinking all the old data is maybe the wrong way to look?
Oh, I've got mixed feelings because I do think there's a lot of benefits from big data. And again, the main thing is that it's when we just concentrate on the kind of easily linear structured data, we're using such a small amount. But I think there is problems in that it's the questions that we're asking in the first place that are the big issues. If you're not asking the right questions, it doesn't matter how kind of clever the algorithms are and the things are. They won't get you the right answers. And there's a lot of things that you can't predict. And I think it's okay to not say you don't know things as well. And and for things to be kind of proven again. I think in the art world, especially. When people are using indices and things like that more, and it's the same in a lot of areas of research, medical research, all these kind of different areas. The big kind of thing is replicability and this kind of crisis of can you replicate the same results over again? So a lot of the times researchers can't replicate their own research themselves, or other people can't do it, and you can have these kind of spurious correlations millions of times over. So it's an over-reliance on thing without kind of questioning the hypotheses that people are putting together. The questions need to be asked. There's very good ways to reduce modeling errors through using big data and these simulations, artificial intelligence and machine learning and simulations running over and over again. But you still need to be asking the right questions in the correct way, I think.
And is there a different right question for Latin American art or old master art or emerging art, or is it pretty much the same kind of economic questions across categories and geographies?
Yeah, no, it is that. I mean, and this is what I was very kind of against is this is what I'm talking about, this kind of crisis of replicability, is the using indices that you can't replicate them, using indices for the art market as a whole and things like that are, when all of the, you can show that all of the different sectors of the market behave so differently. And I would argue even at a sector level is too broad to be looking at. You'd need to look at a very finite level, a very small and finite level to be able to use these. And they never, those kind of metrics are used as they should be in all industries, just as an added kind of tool rather than a guide to what to do. I mean, for advice on, which painting to buy or not, they're not going to be any use.
Okay, so as a capitalist, and a business that's focused on money, do you think they should be investing? It seems like an auction house seems sort of obvious. They've got 2,000 people. They probably should have an MIT, PhD, engineer kind of guy running that kind of data mining. Should a gallery be like having somebody out of 20 people? Should a collector be hiring this out? Should an artist be reading these things, or just... I mean, is it a profitable place
you don't have to do it all yourself. That's the one good thing. And I mean, I think, again, looking back at Artsy, because they are probably the most trafficked site that there is, they're gathering huge quantities of information. And they bought Art Advisor last year, and it's kind of a data analytics company with a very talented guy running it. And that was to kind of do very good analytics for both users and for galleries. They offer galleries monthly analytical reports on where certain artists are viewed, or how they're who's following them or whatever, and it just allows people to do more strategic marketing. And I was kind of asking the guys at Artsy what that actually meant, and the example was that, say for example, a gallery has 5,000 artworks they want to post online. Instead of posting them all and drowning the kind of users in this kind of sea of things that's too confusing to scroll through, they can wait till an artist has a particular spike of interest and then post works by that artist. So they can do a lot of strategic kind of marketing.
But they're a little bit trying to say, well, whichever artist gets the most hits on Instagram, that weights to them being a more valuable, successful artist, so you should go buy it. I mean, that's kind of
it's not saying that
part of what they've at least started with. Like,
it's not saying they're more valuable. It's just saying that they're more. There's more interest in that. There's a bit of a flurry of interest in the moment, so they can offer. That's a good time to show people that you have that one
but they give 3 points to a show in Cincinnati and 8 to MoMA. I mean, I'm a little bit hesitant on this, but I maybe have, a different vantage point.
It's a tool for galleries, and a lot of galleries can't afford to hire a data scientist. They're kind of like 3 or 4 people as they are, with their costs completely stretched by rent and fares and whatever anyway. So it's just, there's other tools out there as well that you don't have to necessarily be that bespoke about it, I suppose.
So what are the downsides, if any, of all this data mining or data gathering or data science?
Well, I suppose it's I think it's taking things as I said, as assumed facts when there's so many, when models, the questions being asked are underdetermined. So there's not understanding the right questions to ask and thinking that, there is a lot of benefits from kind of machine learning and things like that, but thinking that that's going to solve the problem, I think is a danger, because you can still ask the same question and you can have a spurious correlation that repeats itself 100 times over. It's not going to help you with with the machine doing it as a human. I think a lot of the conclusions that, some of the early kind of things that I've seen are very much kind of like so what conclusions as well. If you think of, there's somebody I read somewhere recently about looking into kind of color and its effects on price and things like that. But I mean, that's something that we did in hedonic regressions back in the early 90s. In the very structured data world, and it was certainly, if you go back to kind of old master paintings, people were painted in royalty was painted in blue or something like that. So the conclusions need to mean something and drive something, and then there's all the other aspects of it. I mean, I think. Privacy is a huge issue for people, and we've seen that recently, how important it is. So there's copyright, of use of images, all these things, that they're all kinds of, it's a minefield really that hasn't been sorted out at all. And there will be big penalties for kind of non-compliance with regulations, for kind of the privacy. And I think the people that are on top of that will do okay, but it's kind of, with all it brings, it kind of, it has limits and kind of risks as well.
Now, do you consider blockchain data? Everybody's talking about that for artworks, either to track ownership or to create a different payment structure or keeping security of authenticity. Is that data, blockchain, and will that
I think
change things?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very promising in things like provenance and kind of ownership tracking and things like that. But I mean, I was talking to a couple of people that are working in companies in the area, Robert Norton, yesterday, and he was saying it's a bit like we're at the stage where we were in the early 90s in the internet. He said that's the stage that they're at with blockchain, so I mean, so it's very, very early stages in how it'll go. It will be something that will be very useful in the art market, but it's at really, really early stages. And I think it's just to always, it's kind of probably obvious to most people now, but just to separate the use of the blockchain technology for authenticity and storage of information, which is like it's like having a huge blank spreadsheet, going back to my kind of structured mind, but that's what it's like. It's like having a huge blank spreadsheet that everyone puts information into, but nobody can see. So it's a fantastic way to kind of track and store information, but it's to keep it separate from the kind of currency side, which is just one application of it, which has got some kind of more dubious reputation as it might apply to the art world.
Well, I structure with that one part where you're assuming that no one can see, and that's the part that scares me. That when they say no one can see, oops, so I'm a little bit hesitant of that part. But I think maybe a good time to open for a few questions to see, are we going in a direction that interests you? So if you have a question, if you could raise your hand, we'll bring a mic to you. If you can say, then just if you're an artist or a collector or something like that, you don't have to say your name so we understand. So gentleman in the hat there had a question. Second row.
Hello, my name is Gabriel. I'm a young, small artist. And my question was, how does data collection affect the creative process of an artist? Because it finds out preferences, so will an artist eventually also create in direction of preferences? Does this question make sense? Like, how does it affect the creative process of an artist?
I think I'm not sure if that's a data question. I mean, this is a wider question of it's a question about fairs and the types of art that appears mainly at art fairs and the ones that achieve high prices at auction and things like that. So that there's more of a sense ever more that there's a certain type of kind of work that people find saleable and things like that. So that is potentially. Risky if artists, which I don't believe they are from the ones I know, kind of falling into that trap. But I mean, there is that danger that, in order to kind of make a living, you need to kind of produce things that are a little bit more commercial. So I'm not sure it's a data issue, it's a wide issue. But I mean, what's some of the kind of tools and things to do are to help new collectors as well. So, for example, a lot of collectors starting out know they might, this is kind of not at the ones even going to art fairs, but collecting for the very first time at a low level. They know they like certain artists, but they don't know what to do. They might have bought one of their pieces, but they don't know who to look for, who to ask, or they're not even kind of regularly going to galleries. So kind of the online tools that are being produced can help them. Well, I like X, who else is a bit like that? Or so there's ways to kind of widen the pool of interest for collectors. And the online sector generally is widening the accessibility. I mean, it's not disrupting the offline market whatsoever, but it is widening the democracy, if you like, of buying in the market as well. So it's kind of the online segment generally is a positive thing, possibly for artists. But I think there is an issue, which is a wider one, about making things purely for commerce.
I mean, I think Claire addressed that before. There are or could be studies for what's the most popular color, and you could, as an artist, go, yo, red works, I'm going to make it out of red. And I don't think anybody in this room would encourage artists to work that way, or if they do, to say it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Sotheby's bought that company quite recently, Thread Genius, I think, or Thread Genius, I think it is, which just does this image recognition software. And the thing is, I mean, they said it's to help attribution and stuff, but there is a slight kind of thing that the online auction companies do too, to selling to underbidders and stuff. And so you didn't get a successful bid on that, but here's 5 other things that you might like. So it's a very much a Netflix type of model. It's based on what you've been browsing, on what device, what are the things you search for and things like that. And that, I think that really has limits in the art market. And the first reason is that those algorithms work best when people do the same thing again and again and again and again. They're buying the same things, and that doesn't happen in the art world. They work better where there's the demand curve is elastic, so people are very sensitive to cost, whereas in the art world it's more like that. It's an inelastic demand curve. Prices can go up and down and doesn't necessarily affect demand. And where there's high substitutability, those Netflix models work where you might like something and it might even be unique, but if you don't get your first choice, there's something else that you equally like, whereas that's not the same in the art world. So you say if you're looking at a fantastic blue artwork by some artist that you love, the fact that they offer you another blue large work doesn't mean you're going to go anywhere near it. It's something. The works are unique, and there's the demand is very specific. So I think those things don't quite fit into the art world like they do in the same way for other movies and things.
We had a question over here. Somebody had their hand up before, or someplace else. Somebody have a question? Front. Thank you.
In terms of, hello. Hi. Yeah. In terms of data gathering, I suppose that all the sales which are being made by galleries directly to collectors, these sales are private, and probably this is secret information. If they represent a large portion of sales being made per year, how do you reconcile this with the fact that art data is perhaps more transparent and widely available these days, if they represent a large portion of sales being done every year?
Sure. Well, that's kind of what I meant by the only way you can tackle the private data is to use surveys, which is what I would do in my research. So you run large-scale surveys. And, there's issues with surveys. You have to... But they do a very good job. I mean, they're used in nearly every other industry. If you look at the consumer price index, GDP, all these kind of metrics that we're so familiar with are based on surveys. So they're quite a trusted way to do things. But you do need to tackle it that way. And there is also a lot more gallery information being stored online. Now, it's still not accessible to the public, but it is available. And I would say in years to come, there will be more sense of it being more available. But for research, the kind of the ways that we tackle that large private sector is through surveys. And
do galleries have a bias to overstating their success or understating their success, do you find?
I think most of the ones, I mean, you've got to kind of structure questions to not let that happen, and you kind of to trip them up in various ways when you're structuring surveys. And you obviously have to kind of clean the data at the top and bottom end. But, you know, I think people have learned that galleries have learned that they need this data to represent what's going on. So I think they're probably, in the long run, across everybody, they're pretty unbiased.
Another question, front row again.
Given that there is an increasing demand or interest on the art market from, let's say, people from finance, so art as an asset class, what has been your experience in the interest of these people towards your art market report in general? And if you think there is the need for another art market report? We know there was one which went on only for 1 year. Have you had specific interest from people from, let's say, from finance in general to develop maybe additional kind of research on top of the one that you have been doing so well for many years?
Sure, and there is, and I mean, there's lots and lots of reports being generated. And I mean, I generate other reports besides just this one that I publish globally, and they are for banks and for institutions, for foundations. So there's constantly other reporting going on. It's just not all of it's in the public domain, I think. So there is a lot of people doing reports and stuff already, but there is an increasing demand for it, and it's mainly from people that have some kind of interest, like private banks. But a lot of from the art sector as well, from foundations. I mean, the people that tend to have money for research at the moment are kind of banking people, auction houses, and art fairs. They're the kind of and some private foundations. But it's a funding driven thing. They see the value of research, plus they have the funding to engage people with research. But they're definitely, I mean, since I started my career in the art market, I think there's been a huge increase in interest by the financial sector. And of course, there's a whole new kind of realm of consumers in the Asian markets as well. And I have colleagues that have kind of companies that I work very closely with, the Kari Institute in Shanghai, and they're doing a whole series of reports for people in China as well, like that. So there's quite a few people doing really interesting work on a smaller, just my report is a very industry-wide report. It's just a kind of an annual gauge of what's going on a big level, but there's a lot of interesting things going on at smaller levels on specific artists and different facets of collecting and things like that too.
But I think your question from the narrow world as an art advisor, that finance and hedge fund guys and women tend to really drill completely vertically very well, and that's how they think about everything. So they know everything about Richard Prince from start to finish, and they think that way, and it's just how they approach every problem. And I've also noticed that in Silicon Valley, they don't think that way. And they don't ask that kind of question. They think in a sort of different kind of fashion. So you have different kinds of people trying to take too much information, because we have too much information, and figure out how do I go about it. And you go about it in the way that's sort of closest to you, whether it's emotional, analytic. We all have different methodologies. So yes, those hedge fund guys and women tend to focus that way, but there's other groups of people who don't at all. They might function in a social way, they might function in a purely academic way, and that we have many ways of doing that, but that is one of them. I think we have another. Did you have a question, sir?
Hi. As a collector, one of the things I'm most concerned about is issues of trust and trust in data. When data is well, first of all, the majority of art world data is quite specifically not aimed at the sellers rather than the buyers in order to assist so its initial form becomes a kind of business-to-business operation to those who are selling. That's fine. But the next stage is when information starts coming out as data into the collector world. My concern is trust for the especially in the sort of the classic nature of the art world being as not entirely transparent, let's say, except for what's for what is there in the very few elements of data that can be seen, is the element of trust in data that is being communicated. And really, I'd like to ask your views around how that can be improved and changed as the marketing continues.
They don't want it improved and changed. That's the edge that people have, is the understanding, trust that, don't trust that. That you look at an ArtNet database search and it looks like you have information, but and you'll agree with me, it doesn't say anything about the quality. It doesn't say anything about the condition. So how do you trust that if that's your only information? The way to get things expansive is to hide these things and give you a velvet rope that you suddenly say, I got on the other side, look at me, I'm a collector, I feel special. It's meant to be not transparent, as at least in this building.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think people rely on things like the auction price data to judge the prices of works, because that's all that's, as you say, that's the thing that you can trust because it's actually in the public domain. I think the solution is not crowdsourcing, just getting people to add stuff, unverifiable information, because there is more and more information around, and I don't think that's the solution, just getting people to add in more information that's unverified. I think that's a mistake. I suppose you can use things as reference points, but if something is if you look up your kind of art price or auction club or whatever thing, and you see the range of prices something has sold at, any dealer should be able to explain why their margin is different and what value they're adding, or why it's different from what it's sold at auction. And if they can't, then they can't justify their margins, and you shouldn't trust them. You can. They're only, all these kind of data things are meant to be a guide for you, and it's not meant to replicate the research take away from the research you're supposed to do yourself with verifying things and all the due diligence you should do anyway. It's just as a kind of, it gives you some goalposts, if anything.
Before I ask for another question, you have a lot of notes there. Is there something you meant to say
I don't know what I was writing.
that was essential that we didn't get to before?
No, it's just I didn't know what you were going to ask me, so I went into a panic scribbling late last night of things, so it's not.
Did you cover your top?
Very structured, and you're the unstructured.
Yeah, I'm unstructured data.
Yeah, I'm
structured data. And that. Do we have I think we have time for one or two more questions. Raise your hand. We have somebody on the aisle.
You touched on this a little bit, but how do you structure your like analytic or economic models, given the fact that art is a unique kind of commodity and doesn't function like financial stocks or things that are created that have a predetermined value that's not so culturally attached?
Well, as a client, I would ask Claire, do masterpieces perform better? Do things from the unknown for shows perform better? So I think there's ways to ask the right questions that on unique objects that have no mathematical number themselves.
Well, they have sales prices. So that's what you're generally doing. Most of the modeling that's been done is based not the new big data modeling that's being done by looking at people's preferences, but the kind of regression analysis and indices and everything is based on sales prices. And there's flaws in nearly all the models. There's the hedonic models that take out all the characteristics of a painting, which are prone to a lot of kind of user error. You have to specify everything that could affect the price of a painting. And then there's things like just tracking exactly the same painting over time, the kind of repeat sales, which obviously doesn't give you very many data points. So there's ways to do things, and I think it's just, the valuation things are based usually on past prices, so they're the data points that you're using. And unfortunately, for micro level data, we're still only using auction data prices, which is just as long as you're aware of the limitations of it, it can be quite valuable. But as with any kind of economic modeling, it's always based on 10 or 11 assumptions that you need to keep in mind.
One more question. So who has the best question? Or what the score is of the World Cup, or? It's a good one, right?
Yes, very good one.
Okay.
Claire, in your survey, I've noticed that most of the galleries which you surveyed are anonymized. So in this particular set of data, my inclination is to think that the galleries would potentially inflate the sales volume and pricing and so forth in order to paint a rosier picture that is necessarily the case. When you're surveying galleries, what type of quality controls do you have in place to make sure that they're actually telling the truth and that the data sets they're providing and the sales figures are all actually accurate?
Well, it is user submission, so you're relying on people to give the best picture. I would actually say some of the tendency, to be honest, and the things I sometimes have to weed out is the other way. So I think they would undersell what their sales are to say things are really hard for dealers. You know, that's the kind of, and then like for example, the very top galleries don't always answer my survey. So there's some very, very top galleries that don't. But you can access that information sometimes through different sources, through submissions that they make to, for example, in the UK Companies House and various things like that. And so you check against any official sources. You know, I pilot the survey with various people, and we try and find ways to kind of to make questions that verify the previous questions. You know, you just have to kind of do rigorous testing of the survey. And then I go around the world all year round talking to people to see what sales they made and to do it that way. So there's no easy way to do it. You can do all the good statistical testing and cleaning and things that you can. The rest of it, you have to just make very good sense testing from going around and talking to most of the galleries you're actually surveying as well, which is, yeah, I mean, just the kind of legwork has to go with it as well. And it's a very mixed methodological approach. And this is why Josh is saying I'm the leading person. It's just, I mean, there's not that many people that want to do a big, messy report like this because it isn't easy and you don't have one reliable database to do it. And that's the reason why I think a lot of people don't do it rather than anything else, because there's not a one-stop shop where you can just go to, get the data and do some lovely, clean testing. But I mean, it's a lot of work. One thing I will say, over the years, the galleries are getting much better at answering the surveys, and I think they understand. I mean, I use a stratified sample as well. I do it through their auction, through their dealer associations, gallery associations, so they understand the use it's being put to, and the gallery associations help me to make that point to them, what it's being used for. You know, if you want to lobby for this, that, and the other, we need good data on the art market. So I think they're actually getting better, and the quality of the surveys have improved dramatically over time since I started.
Now, as our time is up, we have one very important thing left to do, because these things are taped, they're online, they're viewed by thousands of people, we hope, on YouTube and into the future. So if everybody on the count of three can say, "Happy birthday, Claire," we are going to do this all together, because 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Claire. She'll never forgive me for this. Thank you.